For 211 miles, the same set of headlights sat exactly 4 car lengths behind me, and when I finally pulled over to let it pass, it pulled over too, then killed its lights and waited in the dark until I started driving again. I found out later, from the tow truck driver who scraped what was left of my truck off that same stretch of road, that there hadn't been another vehicle on that highway in over 6 hours before he got the call. I need to back up, because none of that makes sense without the rest of it. I drove long haul for 6 years, mostly the overnight runs between distribution centers, the kind where you leave at 11 at night so you're unloading by 6 in the morning and nobody's on the road but you, a handful of other truckers, and whatever the state troopers are doing to stay awake. I liked the night runs. Less traffic, less heat, less of everything except the road itself, which after enough years starts to feel less like pavement and more like a long dark hallway in a house you've lived in your whole life. You stop seeing it. You just feel your way through. The route that night was one I'd run maybe 80 times before. 2-lane state highway for the first 100 miles, cutting through farmland and dead little towns that turn their streetlights off after midnight to save money, then it widens into 4 lanes for the stretch that runs along the ridge, the part truckers call the washboard because of how the old asphalt makes your cab shudder at 70. I left the warehouse a little after 10. Radio on low, coffee in the cup holder, nothing on my mind except making good time. I noticed the headlights around mile marker 60, about 40 minutes into the drive. Nothing unusual at first. Somebody merging on from a farm road, settling in behind me the way you do on a highway with nothing else on it, because there's a kind of comfort in following someone else's taillights when the dark gets that total. I didn't think about it again until mile marker 90, when I realized the gap between us hadn't changed once. Not when I sped up over a rise. Not when I slowed for the curve past the old grain silo. For car lengths, like it was welded there. I told myself it was cruise control, 2 people happening to lock in close numbers. That thought lasted me maybe 20 more miles, until I hit the construction zone outside Hendricks, where the right lane closes down to gravel and everybody has to slow to 40 whether they like it or not. I slowed. In my mirror, the headlights slowed with me, matching within what felt like a heartbeat, no drift, no overcorrection, nothing that looked like a foot easing off a pedal. Cruise control doesn't read your brake lights and predict them. That's when the first real unease set in, not fear yet, just a wrongness sitting low in my stomach. I picked up my CB and asked if anybody on the channel had eyes on the road behind me around mile 105. Got 2 responses. One trucker 80 miles south said the highway was a ghost town down his way. Another, closer, said he hadn't passed another vehicle in either direction in over an hour, and asked why I was asking. I didn't have a good answer, so I set the CB down, and I noticed my hand was shaking a little when I did it. I drove another 30 miles telling myself stories. Maybe it was a busted headlight making the car look closer than it was. Maybe it was somebody scared of the dark, hanging back behind my taillights the same way I used to hang back behind others on these roads at 3 in the morning. I decided that must be it, and if that's ugly and impolite it's at least human, and human I could live with. Then I got to the rest stop outside Callum, the one with the 24-hour diner that's really just a counter and 4 stools, and I pulled off to get coffee, mostly to see what the car behind me would do. It didn't take the exit. It didn't pass. It sat on the shoulder of the highway, maybe 200 yards back, engine running, headlights on, not moving, for the entire 18 minutes I was inside. I watched it through the window the whole time. The waitress, when I asked, said she hadn't seen any car pull onto the shoulder, hadn't seen anything go by in the last hour at all, in fact she was thinking of closing early because the road had been dead all night. I want to tell you I turned around right then. I didn't. Turning around meant admitting something I wasn't ready to admit, and driving forward at least felt like a choice I was still making. So I got back in the truck. Within about 90 seconds, the headlights were back in my mirror, for car lengths exactly, like they'd never left. The next hour is the part one still don't like thinking about too hard. I tried everything. I sped up to 90, and the gap didn't change, which should be impossible. Nothing with a driver behind the wheel keeps pace like that without ever falling behind on a curve. I slowed to 30. Same gap. I flicked my brights on and off, some old trucker signal for get off my tail, and got nothing back, just those two white lights sitting steady as a heartbeat monitor. Somewhere around mile 140, I made myself actually study the shape of the light instead of just glancing, and that's when I understood they weren't quite the right height. Car headlights sit low. These sat higher, truck height, except there was no cab shape behind them, no windshield catching moonlight, no grille. Just two lights, floating where a truck's lights would be, with no truck. I stopped trying to explain it after that. I just drove, counting down the mile markers like the countdown could save me. Around mile marker 190 the temperature in the cab dropped hard enough that I could see my breath, heater running full blast the whole time. I checked it twice. And in the mirror, just once, for maybe half a second, I saw the lights blink out completely and come back on, not the way a dying bulb flickers, but the way your own eyes do when you blink, both at once, deliberate. I pulled over at mile 211. I don't fully know why. Every instinct built over 6 years of night driving says never stop on an open highway with something behind you, keep moving, get to people, get to light. But something about the counting, the steady iron patience of that gap never changing for 200 miles, made me feel like stopping was the only card I had left, like I needed to see what it would do if I took the choice away from it. It pulled over too. Same distance back. Then the lights went out, both at once, that same deliberate blink, and it just sat there in the dark, engine sound and all, idling behind me on a dead highway with nobody around for miles, waiting. I don't remember starting the truck again. I don't remember the next 11 miles at all, not 1 second, which the state trooper who found me later told me is consistent with a certain kind of impact trauma, except there was no impact. My truck was found undamaged, sitting crooked across both lanes with the engine still running and the driver's door hanging open, and me nowhere in it. They found me 400 yards into the tree line off the shoulder, unhurt, sitting cross-legged in the dirt like I'd been placed there, with no memory of getting out of the cab at all. They never found the other vehicle. No accident report, no debris, no tracks besides mine. The tow driver who hauled my truck out told me, off the record, that in 15 years pulling wrecks off that stretch of Ridge Road, he's heard 6 or 7 other stories just like mine, always the same 4-car-length gap, always the same disappearing act, and every driver who told him the story afterwards swore they'd counted the miles right up until the moment their memory just stopped. I still drive for a living, but I don't take the Ridge route anymore, not for any price. And on the nights I do have to drive somewhere new and dark and empty, checking my mirror out of habit on a road with nobody on it, I find myself wondering something I've never been able to answer. I never actually saw what got out of that windowless, headlight-only thing to walk me 400 yards into the woods. I only know I ended up there. And some nights I wonder if it walked me in, or if I walked out to meet it halfway. The thing sitting behind me in the back seat had my sister's face, except my sister has been dead for 3 years, and every time I looked away from the mirror and back again, it was 1 inch closer to the front seat. I don't remember the last mile before my car left Route 9, because that's where my memory just stops, and I woke up in a hospital with 4 stitches on the back of my skull that nobody there could explain, because there was no wound on the car to match them. I want to tell this in order, because in order is the only way it makes any kind of sense to me now, even a little. I worked closing shifts at a 24-hour pharmacy for about a year after my sister died. Grief does strange things to what you can tolerate, and for me, the thing I could tolerate was being useful in a quiet building at 2 in the morning, restocking shelves nobody would see until daylight. My drive home took 40 minutes along Route 9, a 2-lane road that cuts through about 11 miles of state forest before it opens back up into town. No streetlights in the forest section. Just trees close enough on both sides that your headlights make a tunnel, and after the first few weeks, driving that tunnel every night at 3 a.m. stopped feeling strange and started feeling almost peaceful, the one part of my day nobody needed anything from me. The first time I noticed anything was small enough that I didn't think about it again for almost 2 weeks. I glanced in my rear view out of habit, not looking for anything, just the reflex of checking, and for a fraction of a second I thought I saw someone in the back seat. Just a shape, pale, there and gone before I could focus on it. I told myself it was tree shadows sliding across the back window, which happens constantly on that stretch, branches breaking up what little moonlight there is into shapes that move like they've got intention behind them, even though they don't. It happened again about 2 weeks later, same spot, almost the same mile marker, and this time it lasted longer. Long enough that I really looked, and in that half second before it was gone I would have sworn the shape had hair the same length as my sister's, pulled back the same way she used to wear it for work. My sister died in a car accident. I think that detail matters, though I couldn't have told you why at the time. I just felt my stomach drop out from under me and gripped the wheel tighter and didn't look in the mirror again for the rest of that drive, which for a driver is its own kind of terror, driving blind behind yourself for 11 miles through the dark. I told my mother about it, carefully, the way you bring up something you're half convinced means you're losing your mind. She didn't laugh at me. She got quiet instead, and told me that in the months after my sister died, she'd started seeing her too, in doorways, at the edge of the yard, gone the second she turned to look straight at it. She said grief does that, your mind builds the shape it's missing out of shadows because it wants so badly for the shape to be there. I wanted to believe that. For a while I did. But it kept happening, and it kept getting worse in a specific way, a way that grief-shaped shadows shouldn't be able to do, which is that it moved. The first few times, the shape stayed in the far back seat, same spot every time, like it was sitting where a passenger sits. Then one night, maybe 6 weeks after the first sighting, I checked the mirror and it was sitting behind the passenger seat instead of the driver's seat, closer to me by a foot or so, diagonal instead of dead center. Shadows don't relocate. Shadows don't pick a new seat. After that I started counting. I know how that sounds, but it's what I did. I kept track of how many times a week I saw it and roughly where it sat, like if I could turn it into data I could turn it into something manageable. Twice a week became 3 times. Passenger side back became directly behind the passenger seat became directly behind me. Every single time, the pattern was the same. I'd glance up, catch it for less than a second, feel my whole body go cold, and by the time I made myself look again, it would be gone, the seat empty, the road ahead exactly as dark and exactly as empty as it always was. The night it ended, I want to say I felt something different from the start, but I think that's just what memory does after the fact, it tries to build a warning into a story that didn't actually have one. It was an ordinary drive. Ordinary shift, ordinary tiredness, coffee gone cold in the cup holder same as always. I hit the tree tunnel a little after 3, same as always. About 4 miles in, I checked the mirror, the way I'd checked it maybe 200 times over those months, and it was there, and it was in the front seat. Not the back seat. The passenger seat, right beside me, close enough that if it had been a real person I could have reached out and touched its shoulder without stretching. I didn't look away this time. I couldn't. My whole body just locked, eyes on the mirror instead of the road, and for 1 full second, maybe 2, I looked at my sister's face looking back at me from a reflection, in a seat that was empty when I looked at it directly, and her mouth was moving like she was saying something, and I couldn't hear a word of it over the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. That's the last thing I remember. Not swerving. Not headlights, not another car, not deer in the road, nothing that would explain what came next in any normal way. Just her mouth moving, and then nothing, a complete blank, the kind of blank that doctors have told me since is unusual for the type of impact my car apparently took, because that kind of impact should have left some fragment of memory, the crunch, the airbag, something. I have none of it. I woke up in a hospital bed 2 days later. My car had gone off Route 9 about 4.5 miles into the forest section, hit a tree, and come to rest at an angle the responding officer described as gentle, his word, gentle, like the car had been set down rather than crashed. I had a concussion, some bruising from the seatbelt, and 4 stitches at the base of my skull, from a wound the doctors couldn't match to anything in the car. No sharp edge in that location, no broken glass back there, nothing in the wreckage that lined up with where the cut was or the angle it would have needed to happen at. They stitched it up, gave it a name that was really just a shrug in medical language, and sent me home. I don't drive Route 9 at night anymore. I don't drive much at night at all, if I'm honest, and when I have to, I keep my rearview mirror angled down, toward the trunk of the car instead of the back seat, so that whatever's back there, if anything's back there, doesn't have a reflection to sit inside of. It's not a real solution. I know that. Mirrors can be adjusted back in half a second by anyone, or anything, that wants to. What I haven't told anyone, not my mother, not the doctors, not until right now, is that the stitches didn't feel like a wound when I finally worked up the nerve to touch them, weeks later, once the bandage came off. They felt like 4 small, precise punctures, evenly spaced, in a line, the exact width apart as 4 fingertips. And I still don't know whose hand made them, or whether it was trying to hold my head still, or trying to hold it in place for something else. I picked up a fare last October from an address that the GPS said didn't exist, out past mile marker 40 on the county highway, and when I dropped him off 40 minutes later back at that exact same coordinates, he thanked me, stepped out of the car, and walked straight into the tree line where there is no path, no driveway, no house, nothing but state forest for 11 miles in every direction. 3 nights later, my phone rang with a number that had no area code at all, just 7 digits, and when I picked up, it was him, asking politely if I could come get him again. I've driven rideshare part-time for about 4 years now, mostly nights and weekends on top of a regular job, because the extra money's good and I like driving better than I like most people, which probably tells you something about why I kept doing it even after that October. I want to walk through it the way it actually happened, because I've told this story enough times now that I know which parts people skip past to get to the scary bit, and I think the parts they skip are the parts that actually matter. The app pinged me a little after 1 in the morning with a pickup request out on County Road 12, which isn't unusual. There's a bar out that way that does decent business till close. What was unusual was the pin. It sat about 6 miles past the bar, way out past where the road stops having any houses on it at all, out in the stretch that runs along the state forest boundary. I called the passenger before heading out, which I always do for anything that looks off, and a man's voice, calm, kind of formal in a way that felt old-fashioned, told me the address was correct, he'd be waiting at the mile marker. I almost cancelled. I want to be honest about that, because it matters later. Something about the calmness of his voice against how strange the request was rubbed me the wrong way, that specific mismatch you learn to notice doing this job, where the wrongness of a situation and the person's reaction to it don't line up. But it was a slow night, the fare was decent because of the distance, and I told myself I was being paranoid over nothing, so I drove out. He was standing exactly at mile marker 40, no car near him, no house lights anywhere behind him, just trees and a man in a gray coat standing in the glow of my headlights like he'd been waiting a long time and didn't mind it at all. He got in the back seat, thanked me by name, which the app does show, so that part one can explain, and gave me an address in town, a real one this time, that I recognized as a residential street about 40 minutes north. The drive started ordinary enough. He was polite, quiet, the kind of passenger you're grateful for at that hour. It was maybe 10 minutes in that I started noticing things I couldn't quite explain away. The first was small, I had the heat running, same as always for an October night, but I could see my breath every time I glanced back to check on him, only when I glanced back, never when I was just watching the road ahead. The second thing was the smell, or really the total absence of one. People carry smells with them, cologne, cigarettes, bar smell, sweat, something. He had nothing. Not even the neutral smell of fabric or skin, just nothing, like the air around him had been erased. I made small talk to settle my own nerves more than his. Asked what brought him out that far past the last house on the road. He said he was visiting an old address, one that used to belong to his family, though there was nothing left of the house now, hadn't been for a long time. I asked how long. He said something like 80 years, said it the way you'd say 8, with no particular emphasis, and I laughed a little, assuming I'd misheard him over the radio, and he didn't correct me, and he didn't laugh either. About 20 minutes in, I checked the rearview mirror out of habit, and for the first time all night, really looked at him instead of just glancing. He was watching me back, which isn't unusual, passengers do that. What was unusual was that he wasn't blinking. I watched for probably 10 full seconds, which is a long time to hold eye contact with a stranger through a mirror while doing 70 on a dark highway, and in that whole 10 seconds his eyes never once closed, not even a flicker, and I had to force myself to look back at the road because my hands had started shaking on the wheel. I finished the drive telling myself all the ordinary things you tell yourself. Tired eyes play tricks. Some people just have a stare. The cold was probably a vent I hadn't noticed. I dropped him at the residential address he'd given, a perfectly normal house with a porch light on, and he thanked me again, used my name again, and told me, right before he shut the door, that he'd like to book me specifically next time, if that was something the app allowed. I told him I didn't think it worked that way. He smiled like he knew something about that I didn't. Here's the part that still catches in my throat when I tell it. 2 nights later, out of nothing but idle curiosity and a nagging feeling I couldn't shake, I looked up that residential address on a map during a slow stretch between fares. The house was there, real, ordinary, a family living in it according to the property records I could find. But the family who owned it had lived there 11 years, and before them, the lot had sat empty for a decade after the previous house on it burned down in a fire that killed everyone inside. I don't know why that detail settled into me the way it did. I just know I stopped taking late fares out past the bar on County Road 12 after that, cancelled anything that pinged from that stretch of road, no matter how good the fare looked. 3 nights after the drive, at almost exactly 1 in the morning, my personal phone rang, not the app, my actual phone, the number I give to maybe a dozen people in my life. The screen showed 7 digits and nothing else, no area code, which my phone has never displayed for any call before or since, and normally I wouldn't answer a call like that at all. I don't fully know why I did. I think some part of me already knew who it was before I heard the voice, and some other part of me needed to know I was right. It was him. Same calm, formal voice, apologizing for the late hour, asking if I might be available to come get him again, same spot, mile marker 40. I asked him, as steady as I could manage, how he'd gotten this number, since the app doesn't share driver numbers with passengers, ever, it's built specifically so that can't happen. He said, and I remember this exactly because I've turned it over in my head probably 1,000 times since, that I'd given it to him myself, a long time ago, and he was just calling to collect on it. I hung up. I blocked the number, though blocking a number with no area code does something strange on my phone, it just sits there in my blocked list with no confirmation, no little checkmark, nothing telling me it actually worked. I never went back out to mile marker 40. I stopped driving that stretch of county road altogether, day or night, and I've turned down every single fare the app has ever offered me that starts or ends anywhere near that stretch of forest since. But here's the thing I haven't been able to shake, the thing that sits with me on every quiet drive since. He never once told me his name, not when I picked him up, not in the whole 40 minutes he sat behind me. And when I search back through my app's ride history, looking for that October night, for the address, the fare, the payment, anything, there's nothing there. No trip logged for that entire night at all. Which means, as far as the record's concerned, I was home in bed. So I've stopped asking how he knew my number. What I want to know now is who he thinks gave it to him, and when.